In this module, we're going to build on all of the tools we learned in basic trigonometry in the last module, and we're going to use them in order to solve problems where we're given some information about a right triangle and we want to find other information, either the length of a side or the measure of an angle. And then we're going to build on from there to be able to solving real-world problems that involve these parts of right triangles. But before we do that, I want to make sure that we've got a good cover of the basic skills we learned in the last module. And so I've got this reference sheet that I want you to print out and fill along with me here on this sheet. So we have here a right triangle, and I've got one of these angles marked with a variable. If you don't remember this, this symbol is the Greek letter theta. And this is the variable we will generally use to talk about the measurement of an angle. That's going to let us use X, Y, and Z and letters like that to talk about lengths of sides, so that when you see a variable, you can tell whether it's talking about a side or an angle. Once we've got an angle identified in a right triangle, we're going to name the three parts of the triangle. All right, the side that's the longest side that's opposite the right angle, we've been calling this the hypotenuse for a while now, and we're going to continue to do that. All right. And of the other two sides, we have been calling them legs, but we want to give them more specialized names so we can tell the difference between the two of them. So when you're thinking about the angle over here, this side over here that's as far away from the angle as possible, we want to call this the opposite side of the right triangle. And the other leg, the leg that's part of the angle marked theta, we want to call this the adjacent side. Adjacent is a vocabulary word that you may or may not be familiar with. Basically, in English, it just means next to. So this is the side that's next to the angle. In fact, it's one of the two sides that make up that angle. So we've got the adjacent side, the opposite leg on the other side, and then the longest side, as always, is the hypotenuse. And once we've decided on the names of these three sides, we can talk about the ratios of different sides of this triangle, and we're going to name those with trig functions. Okay, so these are the primary trig functions. We have the sine, which is the ratio of the opposite leg to the hypotenuse. The next one is the cosine, and the cosine is the ratio of the adjacent leg to the hypotenuse. And the last function is tangent, and this is the ratio of the opposite side to the adjacent side. So these three functions, sine, cosine, and tangent, and their definitions, the ratio of two sides, this would be hard to memorize. There's no real sense of why these are defined the way they are. And so one of the things that we have always done as a people is to kind of come up with some memory tools that are going to help us remember which of these functions go along with which of these definitions. And the key word, let's say word, but it's really just this series of 9 letters, SOHCAHTOA, SOHCAHTOA. So you can either remember the word or the sound SOHCAHTOA, or another thing that I like to recommend is that maybe you can remember some sentence that begins with these initial letters. For instance, a very common phrase is some old horse caught another horse taking oats away. So you can just kind of picture that in your mind. Some old horse caught another horse taking oats away. You repeat that to yourself a couple times, it gets stuck in your mind. I mean, if you write down those capital letters, every time you do a trig problem, you'll see me doing it over the course of this module. This is going to help you remember the trig definitions, because look at what we've got. SOH, sine, is the opposite over hypotenuse. Sine, opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine, adjacent over hypotenuse. And tangent is opposite over adjacent. Okay, so if you've got this sheet filled out, keep it next to you while we're working on these problems, and it's going to help you as we build up these skills and use them over and over in the course of this module, and it will become second nature to you before long.